everybody. How did you find the reading last night? Did anyone look at it? No one. Not a single soul.
Could you post them a bit earlier, maybe?
Well, they're designed to be after the lectures. So
I mean, like when I'm saying earlier, I mean earlier in the day.
Oh, okay. Well, I mean, yeah, I don't think they don't have to. They're not continuous in today's material. So I will post the ones that would be. It takes me a little bit of time to determine exactly what, depending on what I've seen in lectures you've enjoyed on the day, we should cover in the material. But I will try to post it today. All right. There is a bit of a reservation about history of economic thought, in that we need to realize that not everything we're learning in a history course is necessarily of economic significance of today. And I think that's in part why we study history of economic thought. Today we're going to look at specifically the Austrian school of thought. Now, the Austrian school of thought is one lecture that I think everybody dreads, and it's no surprise I would have got it. The Austrian school of thought is now quite forgotten. And we're going to work through the reasons why it's been quite forgotten, as well as what was novel about the Austrian school of thought. It's important, though, to, at the moment, almost displace what you currently know about certain topics. Because when we look at it through an Austrian perspective, we are examining a perspective of what some people could consider dead ends and others could consider a mine of potential beauty for alternative theories to modern neoclassical. But it's tricky. So today we're going to be looking at these Austrians. Now, I mean, yesterday we covered the English and the Zahn school. But what makes the Austrians again significant is that they have a very different approach to what we have become used to in our leading to neoclassical view, these parties who have informed our modern approach. Firstly, for the Austrian school, it is a school of nervous people, ultra uncertainty. These people are not the sort of people who would be expostulating ideas on people like Homo economicus. Much to the contrary. If anything, they would be the sort of person who views the consumer as a nervous bag of wreck, a concerned member of society, someone who can't make up his mind, even when he's at sort of knife's edge to have to do it, a hesitant decision maker. We call these people, and I'm going to give these the term ultra-subjective, because they are subjective to the point of it almost being difficult to rank their utility functions, to be able to say, well, I prefer this over that. There's also, for the Austrian school, a very big emphasis in this idea of time despendency. We're going to be covering a little bit of work a bit later which will illustrate this. The founder of the Austrian school as we know it was Menger. He was a man of immense talent. He was the private tutor to Crown Prince Rudolf, who committed suicide along with his mistress. And he was an opposer of the German historical school. Now, who knows something about the German historical school? And what is the German historical school? And that noise. Well, all right. So the German historical school. The German historical school is, in some respects, similar to the classical school of thought that we were seeing that existed in England. So let's draw a parallel here to the English classical school. But different. The German historical school is not historical because it's old. It informs its economic opinion from historical basis. The head of the German historical school was Schmollem. Now, Schmollem wrote a lot of very controversial things which we haven't included in this course because it's a little bit further than what we can necessarily teach in 5 lectures. But his economic analysis was informed by historic events. It was historic analysis almost to explain the event rather than to postulate it happening. Now you can see that this is a little different from what we understand now as neoclassical economics. Our concerns are with regards to prediction moving forward. But the German historical school were economists of the past. In some respects they probably did very good anthropological work. A member of the German historical school who you would have met already, though he doesn't form exactly in the time period, is Weber. And I think you would have seen from Weber's writing the sort of heavy emphasis on changes in society, this pastoral society which moved to this, to that, to that. And although he's painting a great picture, he's not making informed economic decisions. He's most certainly not telling you about the interest rate, wage rate, or anything of that nature. But the Austrian school is even more different. Method straight is the hallmark feature of the Austrian school. What is method straight? It sums up the battle of methods that occurred in these emerging schools of thought. I think that yesterday I drove home the point of the sort of Newtonian desires of our English and Lausanne school. You saw, when you open the reading, the heavy emphasis, and I've drawn to your attention the use of calculus sometimes for the first time in economics. For the Austrian school, this was completely different. The Austrian school said that they believed that the truth in economics is held through inductive logic and argument. Now, what does this have to say for us? Well, you're not going to see in the Austrian school anything that looks like calculus. In fact, there are pages and pages and pages of this Austrian school which reads more like Kant, for those who've read Kant, the German philosopher, than it does actual economics. That's because it is argument of economics. It is presenting an argument and following through with it. And so we're going to be investigating Mayer's utility theory, and I assure you, despite having got it right, because I've thrown some good hours into this, you'll be astounded at how difficult it is to follow his utility theory. I have set a reading on what we're going to be covering today in his utility theory. And I think it's reasonable that what we are taking home from covering in this utility theory is an idea of the differences between the schools of thought, as opposed to necessarily what is in Menger's utility theory. First of all, let's see. For Menger, the source of utility theory is different. It wasn't this desire to want to create Newtonian calculus. No, it was instead just an advance in considering what is value, which is how Menger ties into our other schools of yesterday. He is also concerned with value. But instead, he makes a very complicated argument for goods of different orders. And it kind of works like this. A good of a first order is something that can be immediately consumed. A good of a second order is a good which is dependent, which the first good, or the good of the first order, is dependent on. So we have a first order good, and this would be immediate consumption. And we have second order goods which are dependent goods. Menger also uses the least dependent use as a means of answering his utility theorem. what is this least dependent use? It's a tricky thing to answer. For this is how Menger describes utility. The goods run along this top axis in Roman numerals from 1 to 10. The subjective value that you get from an infinitesimally small amount of the goods are listed in these columns over here. Now, this is essentially, this table was Menger's approach to utility, and it has some problems when he wrote about it originally. When you're reading this in the reading, you'll see that there's 2 pages of footnotes qualifying how it works. And that makes teaching it rather tricky too. So I'm going to try and give you the general flavor of it, as opposed to harping on the deep principles. Some of the assumptions which are important to understand for Menger's utility are this idea that each good has to be the same price, which at best is fishy. But he tries to make away with it by saying that if we're considering the infinitesimally small amount of it, the prices must be infinitesimally similar. But again, without any use of mathematics, this argument is presented simply in words and using what he calls inductive logic. So we have to follow it. Menger says that some sort of budget optimization occurs, but he's vague on it. It kind of works like this. You pick a number, and the number you pick denotes the amount of a couple of things. The amount of that good you buy and what you get to buy. Let's say we pick number 10 over here. That means you get 1 unit of good 1. But say your budget constraint allows you to have these 2 infinitesimally small cheap goods. So we pick 9. Well, what he's saying is that at the point 9, we can afford 2 goods of type 1 and 1 good of type 2. And you shake your head. What does he say? How can you afford 2 goods of these types? Well, it comes down to this concept that Menger is speaking about goods of multiple orders, and they're dependent usages on each other. The first order good, here, 1 unit of it, must be consumed into the production of making this. So in order to achieve good 2, you must at least have good 1, but you still need a 1 unit to consume. So there must be a consumption as well as a good which you can move into another consumption world. In the same way, if we want good 4, we must have this entire row and the reciprocal numbers. So we have 1 good of good 4, 2 goods of good 3, but 1 has been used in the production of good 4. And 3 goods over here, but 1 has been used in the production, but 1 has been used in the production over here, and 1 has been consumed, and 1 has been produced over there. And so on and so forth. And you arrive at your utility by adding up these numbers, which is problematic, because you'll see you go from 10 to 18 to 24, etc. So Menger has put down what we could at best describe as something like a cardinal utility theorem. He's also talked about, quite in depth, how we rearrange our preferences when our budget constraint changes, and how if we are on a desert island, we need to constrain ourselves according to what we see. I think that's enough detail for something which is very tricky to... Yes?
Just clarification, the numbers they represent consumption bundles.
Oh, hold on. Which numbers? The Roman numerals or these?
Yeah.
These represent utility, but the reason they have numbering is so that you can follow which goods are kind of drawn from these orders. all right, let's try and answer it. Consider each of these numbers as a placeholder for consumption. You must start at 10. Okay? This table is constrained, but essentially it would be ad infinitum number of goods, and you'd have to make the argument that this would be close to infinity here, because this number corresponds with the number of goods. Now, we've only got, our budget allows us to buy one good. The fact that it's at 10, the 10 is just a ordering number. The next thing, when we buy two goods, you see, if we buy two goods, we must have one to consume, and the ordering number is 9, which allows us to know that we must have one of one. Not satisfied. Let's try again.
So on the if we could look at these as axes, on the horizontal axis we have the Roman numerals.
Mm-hmm.
So running down the side, you would have numbers of goods consumed.
No, not numbers of goods. The position of the good.
Yeah, but like what I'm saying in the context of numbers of goods, like each row represents consuming one of each good. The second row is consuming two of each good. That's what I'm saying. And then the numbers match the consumption.
Okay, no, all right. So let's run with your logic. We're at good 3, right?
Yeah.
How much do we get to consume of good 3?
In the first row, in order to consume one of good 3,
yeah,
you need to have 2 of good 2 and 3 of good 1.
No, a little different. He's saying we get 1 of good 3.
Yeah.
Okay. In order to have 1 of good 3, we need to consume a previous order good.
Mm-hmm.
1 of this good. Let's go to that good.
Yeah.
Okay, and then that good, we consume 1 here, 1 goes there, and 1 goes there.
So in order to consume good 3, you need 1 of both good 1 and...
Yes, because it's second orders. The orders build on each other. We can't simply have, the one thing must exist before the next. We're going to see this in Bombardment's capital theory shortly. Yes?
Is this in the sense that, like, if I want this T-shirt, then it has to have the constant in it and the labor in it and stuff? Like, is the different components of the third order good that is like the first order, for instance?
Let's use an example. How about this one? Good 1 is grain, okay? Good 2 is sheep. Good 3 is mutton, the meat, okay? In order to have mutton, I must have grain. I eat grain myself. That's what Megan says. I feed some of my mutton to my sheep. Okay? So the sheep has to stay alive. Sorry, yeah, I feed some of my grain to my sheep. Oh dear, it says it to a carnival. I feed some of my grain to my sheep. But I need to feed, that's just keeping the sheep alive. If I want to eat mutton, I need to feed more grain to my sheep. The sheep needs to get fat, and then only can I consume the sheep. So it breaks down all the dependencies that occur on the good. All right. Look, I'm not buying it either, but this is why we're discussing these things. We have to look at good and bad theory sometimes. All right, yes, I'm going to take, hopefully these questions are quick.
It's just when you're looking at utility, surely you're going to get double counting if you...
Well, not according to Menger. Menger says that in order to have this, you must have that. And these things, you can't consider double counting as much as placeholders of cardinal utility. I mean, the way he shows it, this is bizarre. By all accounts, I promise you I've given the correct account of it, but it's not what we're used to. I mean, if you studied in Austria, you might have 6 months of trying to expound this sort of stuff with saving principles. But the reality is that we moved away from it. Why do we show it? Well, it makes a fairly good argument for a different setting of cardinal utility. And if we, as we're going to a little bit later in this course, consider at the real depths what utility theory is doing, we might have to consider other sources of utility theory, like the Austrian school. All right. Next, we've got one of Menger's pupils, Weiser. Now, we're going to speak to him as a little bit of a footnote in this course. He was mainly concerned with costs. He was concerned in particular with imputation, which is maintaining factor prices that are determined by output prices. The study of imputation, and it's not, you need to think of it as like imputation, is the cost of all the inputs which pop out. And he's concerned himself with cases where we're spending too much on our inputs and the value of the good doesn't represent it. It's value theory, but from a cost perspective. Mengel was presenting value theory from a utility perspective. He didn't ever mention anything with regards to costs. Had no idea. Costs of goods didn't, unlike Jevons of yesterday, have a sort of backdoor argument that costs were derived from labour because labour determines supply and supply determines final utility. No, Mengel. This chap, however, he concerned himself with trying to align some of Mengel's thoughts. But what you'd more likely see him for is a teacher of Schumpeter, who you're going to meet a bit later in this course, if you haven't met him in one of Nicholas' earlier readings already. And he succeeds Menger on the Viennese chair. But the real hero of today in terms of capital, in terms of theory, is Barwick, or von Barwick. Although you don't often pronounce these vons, this is also von Weiser. We tend to drop out the von because it is actually a given, it's as if it's in the Austrian language a sign of title. So it would be Lord Barwick. And we go straight for the Barwick. Alright. Now, if you found the previous one hard to swallow, you'll be amazed at this one. Von Barwick spent his entire life looking at this idea of ordered capital. And with no mathematics, and to his detriment, he tried to come up with a theory of capital which today's word of the day is roundaboutness. So, what does roundaboutness have to say? Well, for von Barwick, capital was not something which we consider today to be capital. What would be your consideration of what is a definition of capital? Not a trick question. What do we learn for 3 years on the concepts of what is capital? Things that help you make more things, okay? Now, von Barwick's theory of capital says that capital are the stuff that is involved in time roundaboutness. So, first, let's define what a direct method is. A direct method would be something like if you're on the island and you're Robinson Crusoe. You catch a fish, and you catch a fish with your bare hands. Now, with the aid of capital, as von Barwick describes it, we can increase our physical value by using the capital good to catch more fish. Okay, so we have a capital good. In this case, it will have to be von Warwick's example of a capital good would be a net. We have a direct method, we have a capital good, which is a net, okay? Hold on. Now, we have physical value, and we have a final thing that is that what he calls capital. Now, von Warwick says that capital goods need to, in order to have these capital goods, we need to have. This is so tricky to explain. All right, it works in similar ways to Menger's dependency on utility. If you want to have something, a new physical value, which is what he considers something that we could use, a utilizable good, that could be determined in two ways: using capital or not using capital. It seems a bit obvious, doesn't it? The direct method is, for instance, when fishing, you'd be a Robinson Crusoe using your bare hands. But Robinson Crusoe could also devote time to creating a fishing net, couldn't he? With that fishing net, he would have to give up catching fish today, but would be able to catch more fish tomorrow, right? Now, von Warwick forgets that there's this interdispendency. He says, don't worry about that, because I'll show you that using roundabout methods, which means that you create a piece of capital to be used in the process of achieving the next physical value, the end consumption good, you will always have more output. Well, this just seems flabbergasting, doesn't it? I mean, this is what he's really purporting to say, is that you're going to have more output if you spend time making intermediate or roundabout methods. And the problem is, it is flabbergasting. What he uses it for is to determine three ways of defining, and for the first time we're going to have a suitable or mad definition of what interest is. He says that interest is this sort of time, the ownership that time gets or weighting gets on capital. So we need to consider capital as being consistent of labor and the capital, because it's this roundabout process. You need to, you have now a net, all right? But a net, if you've got a net, you want something that's bigger. You want a double net to catch more fish at more times. That means you need two nets. So you need to produce two nets and join them together with a pole, like this. Okay, so you can run around with your island with two nets on a joint pole. And he says that this is the consumption of previous capital, which he says must inherently be labor, and weighting. And he says that interest derives its power from the weighting principle. Indeed, it's hard stuff to swallow. When von Warwick was presented this, because his book on capital exceeds 400 pages, and it's one of these terrible books that, as much progress as it makes, it seems to go backwards on. For everything it says to you, it gives you about 3 exception cases which he's already considered, and a couple of situations where he doesn't think it would work. And although it's considered the preeminent text of Austrian history, economic thought, I would wager to say that it's possibly the least useful. And although he denies that capital earns interest through this weighting, he tries to push the argument into a very complicated argument similar to Ricardian theory of labor and capital and rents that receive on capital. Nothing. No, don't know this. Okay, we'll cover it next. it falls over quite quickly. It has, though, got to do with being the possible only explanation which would overcome the theme of these 5 lectures, which is starts with the Wicksteed we saw yesterday. The Wicksteed showed out through Euler's theorem that the marginals must be consumed. However, there are other problems with this, and we're going to link it up with the Cambridge Capital. However, for now, I think that that's enough on von Barven. Instead, let us now, having looked at this neoclassical revolution, put the final nails in the coffin of classical economics. Yesterday we made some inroads into it. We said that subjective value theory was one thing that undid it, and we discussed it. But I now want to give quite a good critique on what were some of the other parts that undid our classical doctrine. Firstly, I know it sounds funny, there are problems with Ricardo's theory of things relating to the Corn Laws, which was a passion throughout his life, but really it has to do mostly with commodities. And it runs along the lines that Mill tried to save what Ricardo had written about protection. I don't know how much you've covered of this, so I'm a little apprehensive to give you much detail. But Ricardo had spoken a lot about Ricardian rents. Are you familiar with that term? And Mill tried to show that this was essentially one way of ascribing value to the composites, as opposed to yesterday where we saw Wicksteed's principle where he used Euler's theorem. So that's the one aspect. The second aspect is that the writings of Ricardo's were at best abstract. And they were a theory which was tempered by time. What does the tempered by time part mean? Well, it means that Ricardo was trying to answer a problem with high theory, but often his problem implicitly brought in what was happening in England at the time. Things relating to wages and the Corn Laws in particular. He solved problems by reliance on external functions. And that reliance was difficult because it's as if he's trying to postulate independent theory that uses events like the Corn Laws and the building up of tariffs as explanations for changes. You'll see that these are sort of ideas of Schumpeterian thought a little later. The other problem was the Victorian era could not produce a suitable explanation for the large level of wage instability and deflation. And finally, this topic of wage is quite a tricky one. Because nobody had yet explained it. And see, Wicksteed had. And he'd done so using the concepts we learnt in marginal utility. Adam Smith, on the other hand, has a terrible explanation for wage. He says that the amount of wage is determined by a danger factor. More dangerous work would determine higher wage. But it quickly became apparent that the theory on which people were building wage-based models was very flawed, in that in the Victorian era, more and more plushy work, being a doctor, being a lawyer, which tended to have less and less danger, did not actually had actually a higher wage. And these were the sort of problems that high theory of that time had come about. They had come about with problems that the theory that sought to explain the situation by using the factors of the economy. In summation, let's get it down so that you have it nicely for a test. The subjective theory of value was the number one. The second was Ricardo's abstract principles. And the third was this degeneration of wage. The fourth could actually be the concept of what was being written prior to the neoclassical era of Jevons was not accepted outside of England. The Austrians certainly didn't accept it. The German historical school weren't interested in these heavy Ricardian models. In fact, it only really carried much weight, and the only economist who, of this period, outside of England, managed to traverse was Malthus, whose theory of population growth and other things also reached an untimely end, when in fact production could keep up with population growth. We've seen all those problems before. And so now we've looked at three schools who started our neoclassical revolution. But we need, yeah.
Sorry, one question back there on the corner. What was it say there, the commodities?
So his corn laws you could consider as an example of Ricardo's abstract writing on commodities. Okay. You know, he was focused on corn as a commodity, how the corn laws affected Ricardian rent on corn, and this is high theory, but it's not theory which is generalizable. And so now we must have a consolidation. We're going to look at a little bit in this lecture. We're going to look at Marshall, but we're going to be looking at tomorrow a very interesting, also than I think this one, similar to the first lecture, a very interesting lecture in Marshall and Wicksteed with elements of Bigot. First, let's have a look at Marshall and how and why he stands apart from our previous economists. We want to paint the picture for the consolidation era. We've had all this thought. Marshall was one of the first economists to have read into school. He read Wallace, he read Pareto, he had read Jevons, Wicksteed, and Edgeworth, and he had read the Austrian school, which put him in a unique position. Alfred Marshall, though, was kind of the person who was poised at the exact moment to make grounds in economic theory. He was a gifted person, fully lingual in 5 different languages, of which are probably all the most tricky: ancient Greek, Hebrew, Latin, German, and French. Anything that he might have needed to read early in previous economic theory. He was an extremely talented mathematician. His father had pushed him towards studying the classics at Oxford, but in an act of massive rebellion, he drove himself to want to become a mathematician, seeking the answers through what he considered must be a pure form. In fact, He was, do you know what the tripos is, the Cambridge tripos? The Cambridge tripos is a grueling test, now abolished because it's actually just too terrible. That used to leave anybody who went through it scarred. It's a set of 5 days of solid mathematical examinations on your entire understanding of mathematics. An examination would hardly be more than a single or 2 questions at most, written up on the board and left to the students to solve. These questions were not simple questions that you would have seen in textbooks or previously. They were unsolved mathematical problems of the day. They were difficult questions. The tripos was a live or die situation. Those who made it through the tripos, and you could only make it through the tripos by being in the top 50th percentile, for it was all percentile ranked, the top 3 immediately found themselves chairs at Cambridge or Oxford or anywhere else they'd want to. For those that didn't make it, I think it might be a great example of earliest post-traumatic stress in academic writing. Marshall said it took him 20 years to recover from the tripos. To give you a perspective of how grueling the tripos is, you end your learning at about year 3, the end of undergraduate, by which stage, I mean, you would have read a lot of mathematics at Cambridge. You spend an entire year preparing for the tripos, an entire year, because you have no idea what is going to come. And you spend 5 days of unstoppable time. Now, Marshall was second only to Lord Rayleigh, who along with Thomson discovered the atom. We are dealing with people of really high esteem. And yet, the reason why I stress this is that Marshall goes back to what we could consider economics that is Darwinian inspired. Marshall doesn't even have mathematics in his preeminent text, the Principles. In fact, despite his great ability, he relegates all the mathematics to the appendices. He simply says that we want to look at and show that these, show principles of economics. And he does so in an English setting, in a really readable setting, and we're going to be taking some great readings from Marshall. But who knows anything about what Marshall contributed to economics? Yeah.
Marshall learner curve.
The Marshall learner curve was unfortunately more learner than Marshall. Learner came about 50 years later. Marshall contributed a tremendous amount to economics. The quantity theory of money, Marshall independently came up with, despite. Marshall came up with, for the first time, demand and supply. Marshall came up with elasticity. Consumer surplus. Theories of rent. He explained the production function. He also went on to show how we have what we are used to, this whole idea of utility functions informing demand and supply curves. He called that partial equilibrium, which was a great saving of Walras's general equilibrium. And the reason he said is that this general equilibrium is too fixed. There must be demand and supply curves, not demand points and supply points where under a Tattleman process everybody is equally happy. And so tomorrow we're going to try and build up these demand curves, show a little bit of the intuition from what Jevons' value theories had done, and we'll introduce Marshall. We're also going to look at Figsel, who will carry on with this great critique of the capital-intensive effects, the switching and debate. But for now, that's the end of the lecture. Spot on time. Hope you had a good lecture. Tomorrow is going to be more exciting and a little bit more mainstream, as opposed to today, the Austrians, where you have to really scratch yourself. When you see today's readings, you'll see what I mean with regards to the Austrians. It's truly a situation of see it to believe it. But hopefully that will be good. Thank you, and any questions, I'm here. Yeah.